The first thing Celine noticed about death was that it smelled like iron and pine needles. The second thing she noticed was that death had extraordinarily silver eyes and was currently staring at her like she was a particularly complicated puzzle he was considering whether to solve or destroy. "Well," King Corvius said, his voice like gravel scraped over silk, "this is unexpected." Celine would have laughed at the understatement if another contraction hadn't chosen that exact moment to rip through her body like a wolf tearing through flesh. She screamed instead, a raw, animal sound that echoed off the broken walls of the shepherd's hut and sent a murder of crows scattering from the nearby trees. The infamous Alpha King of the Bloodstone Pack stood in the doorway, backlit by moonlight and falling snow, and watched her writhe on the frozen ground with an expression that could have meant anything from curiosity to contempt. His armor was splattered with blood that definitely wasn't his own, and his dark hair was wild from battle and wind. Behind him, she could see shadows moving, his warriors, probably wondering why their king had stopped his advance to investigate the screams coming from a half-collapsed hut. "Please," Celine gasped when the contraction finally released its grip. Her nightgown was soaked with blood and amniotic fluid, and she was shaking so violently her teeth chattered. "Please just make it quick." Corvius tilted his head, studying her with those unsettling silver eyes that seemed to cut through the darkness like blades. "Make what quick?" "The killing." She tried to push herself up on her elbows, failed, and collapsed back against the frozen ground. The baby kicked inside her, a fluttering movement that felt absurdly gentle given the violence of everything else happening to her body. "You're here to kill me, aren't you?" "That's what the evil Alpha King does." "That's what everyone says." Something flickered across his face, amusement, maybe, or irritation. It was hard to tell with the shadows playing across his sharp features. "Everyone says a lot of things. Most of it is horseshit designed to make their own inadequacies feel less pathetic." Despite the agony, despite the terror, despite everything, Celine felt her eyebrows rise. She'd spent 7 years in a royal court where everyone spoke in careful euphemisms and political niceties. Hearing an Alpha King casually curse like a common soldier was unexpected. "You're not here to kill me," she managed. "I'm considering it," he said honestly, stepping into the hut. His boots crunched on the broken wood and scattered straw covering the floor. "But I'm also considering why Frederick's Omega Queen is currently bleeding out in a shepherd's hut on the border of my territory during the middle of a war. The math isn't matting, as my sister would say." Another contraction built, and Celine braced herself, but this one was worse, so much worse. She felt something tear inside her, felt hot blood gush between her thighs, and knew with terrible certainty that she was dying. That her baby was dying. That Frederick's casual cruelty had succeeded in eliminating both problems he'd wanted gone. "Tell me quickly," Corvius said, and his voice had changed, gone sharp and commanding. "Did Frederick do this to you?" Through the haze of pain, Celine laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Define this. Did he get me pregnant?" "Yes, technically, though I'm sure he'd prefer to deny paternity at this point." "Did he drag me here himself?" "No, he had guards for that." "Did he leave me here to die because the baby came early and might be weak and he needs a stronger heir for his precious prophecy?" She met Corvius's eyes, hating the tears she felt sliding down her cheeks. "That he did personally." The silence that followed was profound. Corvius stood completely still, his expression unreadable, while behind him his warriors shifted and murmured. Celine could hear the wind howling outside, could hear the distant sounds of battle still raging somewhere in the forest, could hear her own labored breathing growing shallower. Then the Alpha King did something that made absolutely no sense. He knelt beside her. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Celine." She didn't know why she answered. Didn't know why it mattered. "My name is Celine." "Celine." He repeated it like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. Then he looked up at the warriors crowding the doorway. "Get me the field medic. Now. And someone find blankets, furs, anything warm. Move." They scattered like leaves before a storm. Celine stared at him, confused and fading. "Why?" "Because," Corvius said, beginning to strip off his blood-soaked armor with efficient movements, "Frederick just made the most spectacularly stupid tactical error of his pathetic life. He pulled off his heavy cloak and draped it over her shivering body. It smelled like smoke and pine and something wild. He threw away the one thing that could have saved him. "I don't understand," Celine whispered. Corvius leaned close, and in the moonlight filtering through the broken roof, his silver eyes seemed to glow. "You're an Omega Queen, Celine. Your firstborn is prophesied to unite the Northern Territories." Frederick decided that baby might be weak, so he threw you both away like garbage. He smiled then, and it was the most terrifying expression Celine had ever seen, all sharp teeth and darker promise. But prophecies don't specify which alpha father sires the child. They just say an Omega Queen's firstborn. And if you and that baby survive the night, Frederick is going to wake up to discover that he just handed his prophesied heir and his queen directly to his worst enemy. The words took a moment to penetrate the fog of pain clouding Celine's mind. When they did, she felt something that might have been hysterical laughter bubbling up in her chest. "You want to save us? For revenge?" "I want to save you because my wolf just recognized your scent and decided you're my mate," Corvius said bluntly. "The revenge is just an extremely satisfying bonus." Before Celine could process that absolutely insane statement, another contraction hit, the worst one yet. She screamed, arching off the ground, and felt something fundamental shift inside her body. The baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not. "Medic!" Corvius roared, his voice carrying the alpha command that made even Celine's Omega Wolf want to submit despite her agony. "Where the fuck is my medic?" A small, fierce-looking woman pushed through the crowd of warriors, carrying a leather bag and wearing an expression of professional irritation. "I'm here, Your Majesty, though I should mention that battlefield medicine and midwifery are somewhat different specializations, O goddess." She'd gotten a good look at Celine and all the blood. "Can you save them?" Corvius demanded. The medic dropped to her knees, already pulling supplies from her bag. "I can try. But this isn't going to be pretty, and she's going to need to fight." "Can she fight?" Corvius looked at Celine, and something passed between them, an understanding, maybe, or a challenge. "Can you?" he asked her directly. Celine thought about Frederick's casual dismissal. About 7 years of being treated like a beautiful ornament that had failed to serve its purpose. About the child inside her who Frederick had declared not good enough before it had even drawn breath. About how she'd been left here to die not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she'd become inconvenient. Rage, it turned out, was an excellent anesthetic. "Yes," she gritted out. "I can fight." "Good," Corvius said. He took her hand, his grip warm and solid and anchoring. "Then fight. And when you survive this, when your child survives this, you're going to watch me burn Frederick's entire kingdom to the ground for what he did to you." "Promise?" Celine gasped. The evil Alpha King smiled. "Oh, absolutely. But first, let's make sure you live long enough to enjoy the show." The medic worked with brutal efficiency, barking orders at warriors who looked utterly terrified of this tiny woman demanding boiled water and clean cloth. Corvius stayed beside Celine through all of it, his hand never leaving hers, even when she screamed so loudly she tasted blood, even when the medic announced the baby was breech and would need to be turned, even when Celine was absolutely certain she was going to die in this freezing hut surrounded by enemy soldiers. "Stay with me," Corvius commanded every time her eyes started to drift closed. "That's an alpha order, Celine. Stay. And goddess help her," she obeyed. The baby came as dawn broke over the mountains, a thin, reedy cry that cut through the winter morning like a knife through silk. Celine sobbed as the medic placed the tiny, blood-covered bundle on her chest, this small miracle that Frederick had deemed unworthy. "A girl," the medic announced, her voice thick with emotion despite her professional demeanor. "Small, but breathing. She's a fighter, this one." Celine looked down at her daughter's scrunched face, at the tiny fists waving in the air, and felt something fierce and protective and absolutely unbreakable settle into her bones. "Luna," she whispered. "Her name is Luna." "Luna," Corvius repeated, still kneeling beside her. He reached out one scarred finger, and the baby immediately grabbed it with surprising strength. Something shifted in his expression, softened and hardened simultaneously. Frederick is going to regret this for the rest of his very short life. How short? Celine asked, surprising herself. Corvius looked at her, his silver eyes holding promises of violence and vengeance. I'm thinking 3 days. Maybe 4 if I want to get creative with it. Make it 3, Celine said. She probably should have been horrified at herself, at how easily she was accepting this alpha's protection, at how quickly she was agreeing to her former mate's death. But Frederick had left her to die. Had left their child to die. Had proven that 7 years of marriage meant absolutely nothing when weighed against his ambition and pride. She was done being the forgiving Omega. 3 days it is, Corvius agreed. Then he did something that shocked everyone present, including himself based on his expression. He leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to Celine's forehead. Welcome to the Bloodstone Pack, Luna Queen. I promise you, whatever you've heard about me is probably true, but I keep my mates alive. Celine looked at this terrifying alpha king who'd somehow become her savior, at the warriors watching with expressions ranging from shock to approval, at her daughter sleeping peacefully on her chest despite being born in the middle of a war zone. And she smiled. Chapter 2: The Treaty of Blood and Snow. 3 hours after giving birth in a shepherd's hut, Celine found herself being carried through a war camp on a litter, wrapped in furs that probably cost more than her childhood home. While the most feared alpha in the north personally supervised every bump and jostle like she was made of spun glass. It would have been romantic if it weren't completely insane. Your Majesty, one of Corvius's commanders, a scarred warrior named Marcus, who looked like he ate nails for breakfast, ventured carefully, perhaps we should discuss the strategic implications of this situation. The strategic implications, Corvius said pleasantly, are that Frederick is a dead man walking and doesn't know it yet. Did I stutter when I gave that assessment? No, sire, but... Then we're done discussing it. Corvius glanced back at Celine, his silver eyes softening fractionally. How are you holding up? Celine looked down at Luna, swaddled in soft wool and sleeping against her chest with the profound peace of the truly exhausted. I've been better. I've also been worse. It's been a complicated 12 hours. Marcus made a choking sound that might have been suppressed laughter. They'd set up a command tent for her, a massive structure that was somehow both military functional and surprisingly comfortable. There was a bed, an actual bed with a real mattress, and a brazier pumping out heat that made Celine want to weep with relief after hours in the freezing hut. The medic, who'd introduced herself as Kira with the footnote that anyone who called her just a medic would find themselves mysteriously developing incurable rashes, bustled in with stern efficiency. Everyone out, she announced. The Luna Queen needs rest, sustenance, and about 6 months of sleep she's not going to get with a newborn. Your war can wait. To Celine's amazement, the warriors actually obeyed, filing out with sheepish expressions. Even Corvius paused at the entrance, looking torn. I'll be right outside, he said. If you need anything. I'll scream dramatically, Celine finished. I've gotten quite good at that today. He cracked a smile, a real one this time, not the terrifying predator grin he'd shown earlier. It transformed his face from brutally handsome to something approaching beautiful. I bet you have. When he left, Kira helped Celine into the bed, checked Luna with gentle confidence, and pressed a cup of something warm and honey-sweet into her hands. Drink, the medic ordered. It's got herbs to help with the bleeding and the pain. Also something to help you sleep, though not too much since you'll need to feed the baby. Celine sipped obediently. The drink was bitter despite the honey, but warmth spread through her chest almost immediately. Kira, what exactly just happened? Why is your king helping me? Kira settled into a chair, her expression thoughtful. You really want to know? I'm currently lying in a bed in an enemy war camp, having just given birth to a baby my husband left to die, while the Alpha King everyone calls the Butcher of Bloodstone is standing guard outside my tent calling me his mate. So yes, I'd really like some clarification on what fresh hell I've stumbled into. The medic laughed, a sharp, genuine sound. Fair enough. The truth is, Corvius isn't what the stories say. Well, he is, but he's also more than that. His father was genuinely evil, the kind of alpha who thought might makes right was a philosophy rather than a warning. Corvius killed him when he caught the old bastard forcing himself on an Omega servant girl. He was 16. Celine's eyes widened. The court called it patricide and treason. Corvius called it justice. He spent the last 12 years proving that power doesn't have to come with cruelty. Kira leaned forward. Every territory he's conquered, he's improved. Better laws, better treatment of omegas and non-wolves, actual consequences for alphas who abuse their power. The other kings hate him because he makes them look bad just by existing. So he's good? Celine asked, uncertain. I didn't say that. He's killed more people than you've probably met in your lifetime. He's ruthless and calculating and absolutely terrifying when he needs to be. But he has a code and he sticks to it. One of those codes is that mates are sacred. If his wolf recognized you. Kira shrugged. You're probably the safest person in the entire North right now. Even though I'm Frederick's wife? Especially because you're Frederick's wife. Or were, technically. The second Frederick abandoned you to die, your mate bond broke. You're free. Kira's expression hardened. And if half of what Corvius told me is true about how Frederick treated you, then honestly, the man deserves whatever's coming to him. Before Celine could respond, shouting erupted outside the tent. Luna started crying, a thin, newborn wail, and Celine instinctively pulled her closer, her heart racing. Through the tent flap, she could hear Corvius's voice, cold and commanding. I don't care what message Frederick sent. Tell him if he wants to negotiate, he can come in person. Otherwise, he can enjoy watching his borders burn. Another voice, muffled but desperate. Your Majesty, he's demanding the return of his queen and child. He says if you don't surrender them immediately, he'll what? Corvius interrupted, and his voice had dropped into a register that made Celine's omega wolf whimper despite not being the target. Attack? We're already at war, you fool. Invade? I'm currently standing on his territory. Or maybe he'll threaten me. The laugh that followed was genuinely amused. Oh, please. Let Frederick come threaten me. I could use the entertainment. Silence. Then, he's offering a ceasefire in exchange for the Queen's safe return. Counteroffer, Corvius said pleasantly. Tell Frederick that Celine is no longer his queen. She's mine. Her child is mine. Her future is mine. And if he has a problem with that arrangement, he's welcome to come discuss it with my sword. Personally. More silence. Kira had moved to stand between Celine and the tent entrance, her hand on a wicked-looking knife at her belt. Celine noticed that despite her small stature, the medic held herself like someone who knew exactly how to use that blade. Sire, Marcus's voice now, careful and diplomatic, perhaps we should consider the political ramifications. The political ramifications, Corvius interrupted, are that Frederick committed an act of such profound dishonor that every Omega in the North will turn against him when they learn of it. He abandoned his pregnant mate during childbirth. Left her to die in enemy territory during a war. Even by Alpha standards, that's monstrous. A pause. No, especially by Alpha standards. We might be aggressive and territorial, but we protect our mates. It's literally the one thing we're supposed to do without question. The other kings won't see it that way, another voice argued. They'll see you stealing another Alpha's mate. Then they're welcome to challenge me about it. I haven't had a good duel in months. Celine found herself smiling despite everything. There was something almost refreshing about Corvius's absolute confidence. Frederick had always hidden his cruelty behind politics and propriety. Corvius, apparently, just owned his violence and dared anyone to complain about it. The tent flap opened, and Corvius ducked inside, his expression still hard from the conversation, but softening when his eyes landed on Celine and Luna. Sorry about the noise, he said. Frederick's getting desperate. I heard, Celine said. You told him I'm yours. I did. He crossed to the bed, moving with predatory grace. Is that a problem? Celine looked at him, really looked at him. At the blood still staining his armor from battles she probably didn't want details about. At the scars marking his hands and neck. At the silver eyes that had seen more violence than she could imagine, but that currently held something almost gentle when they looked at her daughter. Ask me again in a week, she said finally. Right now, I'm too tired to make life-altering decisions about mysterious mate bonds with allegedly evil Alpha Kings. Corvius laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. Fair enough. For now, just rest. Frederick isn't getting anywhere near you or Luna, and that's not a promise. It's a fact. What happens in 3 days? Celine asked. You said you'd kill him in 3 days. His expression went cold again. In 3 days, I'm going to offer him single combat. Alpha against alpha. Winner takes all, territory, titles, and you. And you're certain you'll win? Corvius tilted his head, studying her. Celine, I killed my father when I was 16 because he was a monster. I've fought in more battles than Frederick has attended feasts. I've built an empire from territories everyone said were unconquerable. And most importantly, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to something intimate and dangerous. Frederick fights because he's supposed to. I fight because I'm very, very good at it, and I genuinely enjoy violence when it's directed at people who deserve it. So yes, I'm certain. Celine should have been horrified. Should have been shocked by his casual admission of enjoying violence. But she kept remembering Frederick's face when he'd ordered her abandoned. Kept remembering the cold calculation in his eyes as he'd weighed her life against his military strategy and found her wanting. Make it hurt, she heard herself say. Corvius's eyes widened fractionally. Then that terrifying smile returned. As my Luna commands. He left her to rest, but Celine lay awake for a long time, holding Luna close and listening to the sounds of the war camp settling into night. She'd gone from queen to abandoned prey to claimed mate in the span of 12 hours. Her life had shattered and reformed into something she didn't recognize. But for the first time in 7 years, she didn't feel like a beautiful object on a shelf. She felt dangerous. Chapter 3. The Omega's Education. The problem with being claimed by a warrior king, Celine discovered over the next 2 days, was that warrior kings had very different ideas about appropriate recovery time after childbirth. Absolutely not, Kira said firmly, blocking the tent entrance like a very small, very fierce dragon. She gave birth 48 hours ago. She's not going anywhere, and certainly not to a war council. Corvius, to his credit, looked genuinely apologetic. I'm not asking her to fight. I just thought she might want to hear Frederick's official response to my challenge. She can hear about it later after she's slept for more than 2 consecutive hours and stopped bleeding like a stuck pig. I've stopped bleeding, Celine called from the bed, where she was attempting to get Luna to nurse properly while simultaneously trying not to wince every time she shifted position. Mostly. It's more of a gentle seepage now. That's not the endorsement you think it is, Kira shot back. But Celine was tired of lying in bed, tired of feeling weak, and honestly curious about what Frederick's response had been. Also, staying in the tent meant dwelling on the absolutely surreal situation she'd found herself in, and that waylay madness. I want to go, she said firmly. Kira, I appreciate the mother henning, I really do. But I need to see this. The medic muttered something about stubborn omegas with death wishes, but eventually helped Celine into a dress that one of the camp seamstresses had hastily modified. It was bloodstone colors, deep crimson and black, and fit surprisingly well considering it had been made for someone else. You're making a statement, Kira noted, fastening the clasps. I'm wearing clothes that aren't soaked in blood and birth fluids, Celine corrected. If that makes a statement, so be it. Corvius waited outside, and his expression when he saw her was worth the effort it had taken to get dressed. His eyes went wide, then dark, then settled into something possessive that made Celine's Omega Wolf preen despite her exhaustion. You look, he started. Like I recently gave birth in a war zone? Celine supplied helpfully. I was going to say beautiful, but sure, let's go with that. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Celine took it. His warmth was grounding, solid, real. The War Council was assembled in the largest tent, where maps covered every surface and commanders argued in the productive way of people who actually respected each other. They all fell silent when Celine entered, and she felt dozens of eyes assessing her, some curious, some calculating, some outright hostile. Gentlemen, Corvius said mildly, my mate. Celine, these are my commanders. They're mostly harmless unless you threaten the pack, at which point they become decidedly less so. Marcus stepped forward and, to Celine's surprise, bowed. Luna Queen. It's an honor. Is it? Celine asked, genuinely curious. I'm a liability. A political complication. Frederick's abandoned wife who's now creating a diplomatic nightmare by being here. You're our king's mate, Marcus said simply. That makes you pack. Everything else is details. The other commanders echoed the sentiment with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Celine noticed that while most seemed genuinely accepting, a few looked less convinced. One in particular, a lean, sharp-eyed warrior named Drake, watched her with naked skepticism. Frederick's response? Corvius prompted, steering them back to business. Marcus unfurled a scroll with the silver moon seal. He accepts the challenge. Single combat, 3 days from now at dawn, neutral ground at the Standing Stones. Winner takes the disputed territories, the Silver Moon throne, and... He hesitated. And me, Celine finished. He's wagering me like a prize cow. Technically, he's wagering his claim to you, Corvius corrected. Which he lost the second he left you to die, but apparently, he's unclear on that point. Drake spoke up, his voice sharp. This is madness. We don't need single combat. We're winning the conventional war. Why risk everything on a duel? Because honor demands it, Corvius said. Frederick challenged my claim to Celine. I'm answering that challenge the old way. One alpha, one opponent. The gods judge who's worthy. The gods, Drake said flatly, haven't intervened in a duel in 300 years. Then I guess I'll have to win on skill instead of divine favor. Somehow I'll manage. Celine studied the map while they argued strategy. The Standing Stones were ancient, a circle of megaliths predating even the oldest packs. Sacred ground where pack law said blood feuds could be settled without wider warfare. If Corvius won, Frederick's entire kingdom would fall under Bloodstone rule by right of conquest and divine judgment. If Corvius lost, Celine tried not to think about going back to Frederick. About him touching her again. About raising Luna in a court that had already deemed her unworthy before she'd drawn breath. He won't lose. She turned to find an elegant woman had appeared beside her, tall, with the same silver eyes as Corvius, but a softer face. The family resemblance was unmistakable. You must be the sister, Celine said. The one who says the math isn't mattering. The woman grinned. Lyra. And yes, I have single-handedly dragged my brother's vocabulary into the current century. You're welcome. Also, I'm serious. Corvius won't lose. I've watched him train since we were children. Frederick might be competent, but Corvius is an artist. A really violent, somewhat disturbing artist, but still. That's comforting in a deeply unsettling way. That's kind of our family motto. Lyra linked her arm through Celine's with easy familiarity. I like you. You're much more interesting than Frederick's propaganda suggested. What did his propaganda suggest? That you were a vapid beauty who couldn't produce an heir and spent your days languishing dramatically in gardens. Lyra's expression turned serious. He's been spreading stories for months about your failures as a queen. Preparing the ground to set you aside, probably. When you got pregnant, he changed tactics, started hinting that the child might not be his. Rage, hot and sudden, flooded through Celine. He what? Oh yes. Lots of whispers about how you were too friendly with visiting diplomats, how your wolf was unstable, how the baby came early because it was probably a bastard. Lyra's eyes glinted dangerously. He's been systematically destroying your reputation, so no one would question it when he replaced you. Celine looked across the tent at Frederick's messenger, who was sweating profusely, while Corvius outlined exactly what would happen if Frederick tried to back out of the duel. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of trying to be the perfect Omega Queen. And Frederick had spent goddess knew how long preparing to throw her away so thoroughly that no one would even blame him for it. I want to watch, she said quietly. Lyra squeezed her arm. The duel? Yes. I want to be there when Corvius kills him. I want Frederick to know that I survived. That Luna survived. That everything he tried to destroy is standing there watching him die. That's the spirit, Lyra said cheerfully. Nothing says moved on like witnessing your terrible ex-husband's violent demise. Very healthy. Kira would approve. Kira would absolutely not approve. Kira's voice called from the tent entrance. where she was apparently lurking and eavesdropping. But I'm coming too, because someone needs to make sure Celine doesn't pass out from the excitement or reopen wounds. The planning continued for hours. Celine listened, gradually understanding the scope of what Corvius was risking. If he lost, his pack would be weakened, possibly fractured. Other alphas would see it as vulnerability. The territories he'd fought so hard to improve might slide back into chaos. All for her. For an Omega he'd known for 2 days and a baby that wasn't even biologically his. When the council finally dispersed, she caught his arm. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why risk everything for me?" Corvius looked at her for a long moment. "You want the romantic answer or the honest one?" "Both." "Romantic answer. My wolf recognized you as my mate, and wolves don't lie about that. You're mine, Celine, in the way that matters to my kind. I'd fight the entire North to keep you." "And the honest answer?" His smile was sharp. "Frederick is a mediocre alpha playing at greatness. He rules through fear and political maneuvering instead of genuine strength. I was going to destroy him eventually anyway. This just gives me an excuse to do it publicly and with divine sanction." He tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, the gesture surprisingly tender. "But I wasn't lying about the mate bond. My wolf chose you. I'm just following his lead and adding in my own reasons as we go." That's possibly the most pragmatic declaration of whatever this is that I've ever heard. "I'm a pragmatic man." "But Celine." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "I keep my promises. In 3 days, Frederick dies. And then you're going to help me build an empire where Omegas like you never have to fear being thrown away again." It should have sounded arrogant. Instead, it sounded like a vow. That night, as Celine fed Luna in the quiet darkness of her tent, she thought about prophecies and mate bonds and the strange turns life could take. She'd started this week as a queen in a loveless marriage. Now she was a Luna in a pack she barely knew, claimed by an alpha who killed his own father and apparently collected territories like some men collected swords. Luna finished nursing and let out a tiny burp that was absurdly dignified for something so small. "Your timing is terrible," Celine told her daughter. "You couldn't have waited to be born until after the war was over? Maybe in a nice, safe palace with actual healers instead of a freezing hut with a field medic." Luna yawned, utterly unconcerned with her mother's observations. "You're going to be just like him, aren't you?" Celine mused. "Stubborn and dramatic and completely convinced the world will bend to your will." Outside, she could hear the camp settling into night watch. Guards changing shifts. Warriors sharpening weapons. The sounds of an army preparing for what came next. In 3 days, everything would change again. Celine just had to make sure she survived long enough to see it. Chapter 4. The Standing Stones. The Standing Stones had witnessed more blood than Celine could imagine, centuries of pack feuds, territory disputes, and challenges to the death. The ancient megaliths rose from the snow-covered ground like the bones of sleeping giants, their surfaces marked with runes that predated written history. Sacred ground. Neutral ground. The kind of place where the old laws still mattered more than politics or strategy. Celine stood with Lyra and Kira at the eastern edge of the circle, wrapped in furs against the pre-dawn cold, with Luna sleeping peacefully in a sling against her chest. Around them, hundreds of wolves had gathered, bloodstone warriors on one side, Silvermoon forces on the other, with representatives from neutral packs forming a cautious buffer between them. Everyone wanted to witness this. "You didn't have to come," Kira said for the 5th time, hovering like a worried mother hen. "You're still recovering. If anything happens, then you'll patch me up," Celine interrupted. "I'm here. I'm staying. Stop fussing." Corvius stood in the center of the circle, stripped to the waist despite the freezing temperature, his scarred chest rising and falling with measured breaths. He'd painted the old symbols on his skin: protection, strength, justice. The rising sun caught the silver in his eyes and made them glow like molten metal. He looked like something out of legend. Dangerous and beautiful and absolutely lethal. Frederick emerged from the Silvermoon contingent, and Celine felt her breath catch. He looked smaller than she remembered. Or maybe Corvius had simply made everyone else seem diminished by comparison. Frederick wore ornate armor that probably cost a fortune and did very little for actual protection. He'd always cared more about appearance than function. Their eyes met across the circle. For a moment, Celine saw something flicker in Frederick's expression, surprise, maybe, that she was alive. That Luna was alive. That they were both standing there, healthy and whole, despite everything he'd done. Then his gaze hardened into the familiar cold contempt she'd come to know so well. "Celine," he called out, his voice carrying across the stone circle. "You're looking well for a woman who supposedly gave birth in a shepherd's hut." "I'm told I'm resilient," Celine replied, pitching her voice to carry just as far. Funny how near-death experiences can really bring out one's inner strength. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Frederick's jaw tightened. "Come home. Bring the child. We can discuss your indiscretions in private." "Indiscretions," Celine repeated, her voice dangerously sweet. "Is that what we're calling being abandoned to die during childbirth now? The vocabulary really has evolved since I last attended court." More laughter, louder this time. Even some of Frederick's own warriors looked uncomfortable. "You were a liability during a war," Frederick said, attempting to sound reasonable. "I made a tactical decision." "You made a choice to value territory over family," Corvius interrupted, his voice cutting through Frederick's excuse like a blade through silk. "You threw away your pregnant mate because she became inconvenient. And now you're standing in a sacred circle, about to answer for that dishonor with your life." "There's no dishonor in prioritizing the pack's survival," Frederick argued. "Really?" Corvius tilted his head. "Because I'm pretty sure every alpha here would die before abandoning their mate during childbirth. It's kind of the bare minimum requirement for not being a complete piece of shit." The neutral pack representatives nodded agreement. Even Frederick's own warriors wouldn't meet his eyes. An ancient woman stepped into the circle, the keeper of the stones, bent with age but radiating an authority that made even alphas nervous. She carried a staff carved with the same runes that marked the megaliths, and when she spoke, her voice somehow carried to every corner of the gathering without her raising it above a normal speaking volume. "We are gathered to witness judgment," she intoned. "King Frederick of Silvermoon has challenged King Corvius of Bloodstone's claim to the Omega Celine and her child. King Corvius has answered this challenge with combat. The old laws will be observed. The gods will judge." She drove her staff into the frozen ground 3 times. "Let the combat begin." Frederick drew his sword, a beautiful weapon with an elaborately jeweled hilt that probably hadn't seen real combat in years. Corvius pulled 2 long knives from sheaths at his back, the blades dark and worn with use. They circled each other, and Celine found herself holding her breath. Frederick struck first, a textbook overhead slash that Corvius sidestepped with almost casual ease. The return strike came so fast Celine almost missed it, Corvius's knife opening a shallow cut across Frederick's shoulder, first blood drawn within seconds. 7 years, Corvius said conversationally, continuing to circle. 7 years you had an Omega Queen who tried to love you. Who tried to give you an heir. Who endured your coldness and your court's whispers and your casual cruelty. And you couldn't even muster basic decency when she needed you most. Frederick snarled and attacked again, a flurry of strikes that looked impressive but lacked real killing intent. Corvius deflected them all, his movements economical and precise. "You know what the funny thing is?" Corvius continued, opening another cut on Frederick's arm. "If you'd just been patient, if you'd actually supported Celine through the birth, you'd still have your prophecy, baby. You'd still have your queen. You might have even had a genuine alliance through shared parenthood." "The child came early," Frederick gasped, breathing hard already. "Weak. Premature doesn't mean weak, you ignorant fool. It means your mate was under so much stress her body couldn't carry the pregnancy to term. Wonder what could have caused that." Another strike, this one drawing blood from Frederick's thigh. "Oh right. You and your court treating her like a breeding ornament instead of a person." Celine watched, transfixed. This wasn't a duel. It was an execution dressed up as combat. Corvius was playing with Frederick, using the fight to publicly dissect every failure, every cruelty, every moment of dishonor. Frederick managed to land a glancing blow across Corvius's ribs, and the Bloodstone contingent growled in unison. But Corvius just smiled, that terrifying expression that promised violence. "Good," he said. "I was worried this would be too easy." What followed was brutality elevated to art. Corvius moved like water, like smoke, like something that shouldn't be able to exist in solid form. Every strike Frederick attempted was deflected or dodged. Every opening Frederick left was punished with surgical precision. The cuts accumulated arms, legs, chest, face, until Frederick looked like he'd been attacked by a particularly vindictive painter working in red. "Do you know what Celine said to me?" Corvius asked, driving his knee into Frederick's stomach and sending him sprawling. "When I found her dying in that hut, bleeding out while bringing your child into the world?" Frederick tried to rise, slipped in his own blood, went down again. "She asked me to make it quick. The killing." Corvius crouched beside him, and his voice dropped low enough that only those nearest could hear. But the circle had gone so quiet that his words carried anyway. "She thought death would be mercy compared to what you'd done to her. She'd given up, was ready to die. And you know what changed her mind?" Frederick just stared, blood bubbling between his lips. "Rage," Corvius said simply. "Pure, justified rage at being thrown away like garbage. That's what kept her alive. That's what gave her strength to fight through the birth. Your cruelty, Frederick, saved her life by making her angry enough to survive just to spite you." He stood, looking down at the broken Alpha King bleeding out in the snow. "Any last words?" Corvius asked. "Any profound wisdom to share before judgment is rendered?" Frederick's eyes found Celine across the circle. For a moment, she thought he might apologize. Might show some shred of remorse for what he'd done. "The child should have been mine," he rasped instead. "The prophecy. The prophecy will be fulfilled," Corvius interrupted. "Just not by you. Celine's firstborn will unite the northern territories. But she'll do it as a Bloodstone princess, raised by a mother who knows her worth and a father who'll teach her that power comes with responsibility." "You're not her father," Frederick spat. "I'm the one who's going to raise her. That makes me her father in every way that matters." Corvius raised his knife. "Goodbye, Frederick. May the gods judge you more mercifully than you deserve." The strike was clean and quick, a professional ending to a fight that had never been fair to begin with. Frederick's body went still, his eyes fixed on something only the dead could see. The Keeper of the Stones drove her staff into the ground 3 times. "Judgment is rendered," she announced. "King Corvius of Bloodstone is victorious. By right of combat and divine witness, all that belonged to Frederick of Silvermoon now belongs to the Bloodstone Pack. Let it be witnessed. Let it be known. Let it be law." The Silvermoon warriors knelt in surrender, the old tradition demanding they acknowledge the new Alpha King. Corvius looked at them with something that might have been pity. "You're not prisoners," he told them. "You're not even enemies anymore. You're pack. My pack. And I have one simple rule: I take care of what's mine. Follow that rule, and we'll get along fine." He walked away from Frederick's body without a backward glance, crossing the circle to where Celine stood with Luna. Blood covered him from knuckles to elbows, spattered across his chest and face, but his eyes were gentle when they found hers. "It's done," he said simply. Celine looked past him at Frederick's body, at the end of 7 years of marriage and misery, and felt nothing. No grief. No guilt. Just a distant relief that it was finally over. "Thank you," she said. Corvius's eyebrows rose. "For killing your husband? For making him answer for what he did? For giving me closure? For," she gestured at Luna, at the assembled packs, at the new world they were building. "For all of it." He cupped her face with one blood-stained hand, and Celine didn't flinch. "I told you," he said softly. "I keep my promises. And I promised you'd get to watch him pay for abandoning you." "What now?" Celine asked. Corvius looked around at the merged packs, at the territories that would need to be organized, at the new empire taking shape in the winter dawn. "Now," he smiled, and this time it was warm, genuine, hopeful. "Now we go home. And we figure out how to rule this mess together." Lyra appeared at Celine's elbow, grinning wildly. "Can I just say, that was the most satisfying duel I've ever witnessed?" Frederick's face when you called him out on his bullshit was chef's kiss. There's something deeply wrong with your family, Kira observed, though she was smiling too. There's something deeply right with our family, Lyra corrected. We just express affection through elaborate violence and tactical warfare. It's very healthy. Celine laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Around them, two packs became one. Old enemies became new allies. And in the center of it all, holding a 3-day-old baby who was somehow sleeping through the commotion, Celine felt something she hadn't experienced in 7 years. She felt like she was home. Chapter 5. The Prophecy Fulfilled. 3 months later, Celine stood on the balcony of Bloodstone Palace, watching the spring thaw transform the Northern Territories from winter wasteland to something approaching beautiful. Luna was awake in her arms, gurgling happily and trying to grab at everything within reach with the single-minded determination of someone who'd inherited both her mother's stubbornness and her adopted father's refusal to accept limitations. She's going to be a handful, Lyra commented, joining Celine at the railing with 2 cups of hot tea. I can already tell. She has that look. What look? The I'm going to cause chaos and everyone will love me for it anyway look. Corvius had the same expression as a baby, according to our mother. Celine accepted the tea gratefully. The palace was everything Frederick's cold marble halls had never been: warm, lived in, filled with laughter and genuine affection. Corvius's pack didn't just tolerate their Omega members, they actively valued them, incorporated them into decision-making, protected them without being condescending about it. It was revolutionary, apparently. Several neighboring alphas had sent strongly worded letters about how Corvius was undermining traditional pack structures with his radical ideas about treating Omegas like actual people. Corvius had framed the letters in a study and labeled them fan mail from mediocre kings. The councils assembled, Lyra said. You ready for this? Celine took a deep breath. Today was the official unification ceremony, the moment when the absorbed Silvermoon territories would formally become part of Bloodstone, and when Celine would be acknowledged as Luna, queen not just of Corvius's original pack, but of the entire Northern Alliance. It should have been terrifying. Instead, she felt oddly calm. The throne room was packed with representatives from every territory in the north. Some had come to witness history. Others had come hoping to find weakness they could exploit. All of them fell silent when Celine entered, carrying Luna, with Corvius at her side. The Keeper of the Stones stood before the twin thrones, looking ancient and amused in equal measure. We are gathered, she began, to witness the fulfillment of prophecy. An Omega Queen's firstborn will unite the Northern Territories under one banner. For generations, Alphas have fought over this prophecy, each convinced it meant their child would conquer all others. She looked directly at Celine, and her old eyes twinkled with what might have been mischief. But prophecies are tricksy things. They tell truth, just not always the truth we expect to hear. She gestured to Luna, who was chewing on her own fist with great concentration. This child will unite the North, yes, but not through conquest alone. She will unite it because she is both Silvermoon and Bloodstone. Because her mother learned that strength comes from surviving what should have destroyed you. Because her father understands that true power means protecting those weaker than yourself. The Keeper turned to address the assembled crowd. Princess Luna represents a new way forward. Not the old cycle of violence and domination, but a future where packs work together instead of constantly fighting for supremacy. She paused, letting the radical words sink in. And if any alpha here has a problem with that vision, you're welcome to challenge King Corvius about it. I'm sure he'd be delighted to discuss the matter personally. Nobody moved. Corvius had developed quite the reputation over the past 3 months. 3 different alphas had challenged his rule. All 3 had very publicly lost. The Northern Territories were learning, slowly but surely, that the Butcher of Bloodstone wasn't just brutally efficient in combat, he was also shockingly effective at governance. Trade routes that had been plagued by raiding for decades were suddenly safe. Omega rights that had been theoretical were now enforced with swift violence against anyone who violated them. Territories that had been barely scraping by were now thriving under organized leadership that actually cared about infrastructure and logistics. It was almost disappointing how well peace and prosperity worked once someone bothered to implement them. "Do you accept this charge?" the keeper asked Celine directly. "To raise this child as a bridge between old ways and new? To guide her toward leadership that values all pack members, not just the strongest?" Celine looked down at Luna, who chose that moment to spit up on her extremely expensive ceremonial gown. "I accept," Celine said solemnly, dabbing at the baby vomit with the embroidered hem. "Though I make no promises about the gown surviving her childhood." Laughter rippled through the assembled crowd, genuine amusement that broke the formal tension. The keeper turned to Corvius. "And you, Alpha King? Do you accept this child as your own? Knowing she carries another man's blood, but will bear your name and your legacy." Corvius looked at Luna with an expression of such profound affection that Celine felt her chest tighten. "I accept," he said simply. "Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. And I choose this child, this woman, this future." The keeper smiled, a rare expression that transformed her ancient face into something almost youthful. "Then by the old laws and the new, by divine witness and pack tradition, I declare the Northern Alliance unified under Bloodstone leadership. Let Luna be known as Crown Princess of the North, first of her line, symbol of our united future." She touched Luna's forehead with her staff, and for just a moment, the baby's eyes flashed silver, the color of alpha power mixing with something older, something the North hadn't seen in generations. Then Luna sneezed, the effect was ruined, and she went back to being a normal 3-month-old who wanted to eat her own fingers. "Well," Lyra whispered from her place in the honor guard, "that was either deeply profound or proof that the gods have a sense of humor. Possibly both." The ceremony continued with odes of fealty, territory acknowledgments, and enough formal protocol to make Celine's head spin. But through it all, she kept noticing small moments that would have been impossible in Frederick's court. An Omega advisor openly correcting an Alpha's strategic assessment without fear of punishment. Warriors from formerly rival packs joking together like old friends. A Beta woman being promoted to commander based on merit rather than bloodline. This was what Corvius had meant when he'd talked about building something better. Not just conquering territory, but actually improving it. Not just claiming power, but using it responsibly. After the ceremony, during the feast that followed, Celine found herself cornered by several Omega queens from neutral territories. "Is it true?" one of them asked, her voice low and urgent. "That he really enforces the protection laws? That Omegas here can own property, refuse unwanted matches, bring grievances against Alphas without repercussion?" "It's true," Celine confirmed. "Last week, an Alpha warrior tried to force himself on an Omega servant. Corvius had him stripped of rank and exiled within an hour of hearing about it. Made it very clear that Alpha privilege doesn't extend to assault." The queens exchanged glances, something like hope flickering in their expressions. "How do we?" Another started, then hesitated. "How do we convince our own Alphas to adopt similar laws?" Celine smiled. "You tell them that Bloodstone is thriving under these policies. That we're attracting the best warriors, the smartest advisors, the most skilled craftspeople because word is spreading that we treat our pack members with basic dignity. That fear-based leadership is becoming obsolete, and any Alpha who doesn't adapt will be left behind. And if they don't listen? Then you come here. We're accepting refugees from territories that abuse their Omegas. Corvius has made that very clear. Anyone seeking sanctuary from unjust treatment will find it in Bloodstone lands." More glances. More calculations. Celine could see the wheels turning. This was how real change happened, not through dramatic battles, but through small conversations, practical demonstrations, and the slow realization that better systems actually worked better. Frederick would have hated it. He'd always believed power came from dominance and fear. Corvius understood that true power came from building something people actually wanted to be part of. That night, after Luna had been put to bed in the nursery, guarded by no fewer than 6 warriors who took their princess-protecting duties very seriously, Celine found Corvius in their private chambers, reviewing reports by candlelight. "Come to bed," she said. Whatever territory dispute you're reading about will still be there in the morning. He looked up, silver eyes reflecting the candle flame. It's not a dispute. It's a proposal. Alpha Marcus from the Western Territories wants to adopt our Omega protection laws. He's asking for advisors to help implement them. That's good news, isn't it? It's revolutionary news. 6 months ago, suggesting Omegas had rights was considered radical. Now other Alphas are actively requesting help implementing those rights. He set down the report and pulled Celine into his lap. You did this, you know. I birthed a baby in a war zone. You did the actual governing. You survived what should have killed you, stood in a sacred circle and publicly held Frederick accountable for his cruelty, and then gracefully accepted a role in a pack you barely knew. Every Omega in the North watched you do that. Watched you be strong and dignified and absolutely unbreakable despite everything you'd endured. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You gave them hope, Celine. Showed them that they didn't have to accept abuse just because tradition demanded it. Celine leaned into his warmth, still sometimes surprised by how safe she felt with this man who terrified everyone else. Frederick used to tell me I was weak, she said quietly. That Omegas were naturally submissive, naturally fragile, naturally in need of alpha protection and guidance. Frederick was a moron who confused physical strength with actual power. Corvius's arms tightened around her. You survived his abandonment. Survived childbirth without proper medical care. Survived being claimed by an allegedly evil Alpha King. Survived and thrived and built a new life from the ashes of the old one. That's not weakness, love. That's the strongest thing I've ever witnessed. Evil Alpha King, Celine repeated, amused. Is that still your official title? I'm thinking of updating it to Moderately Dangerous Alpha King with Surprisingly Good Domestic Policy. Less catchy, but more accurate. She laughed, and he captured the sound with a kiss that tasted like promises and possibilities. Outside, spring continued its slow conquest of winter. In the nursery, Luna slept peacefully, unaware that she was the first princess of a united North, symbol of a new age and living proof that prophecies could be fulfilled in unexpected ways. And in their chambers, two people who should have been enemies learned that sometimes the most powerful bonds are forged in fire, blood, and the mutual understanding that survival is just the beginning. That building something worth surviving for is the real triumph. Epilogue, 5 years later. Luna stood in the practice yard, her small wooden sword held with the fierce concentration of a 5-year-old who took her combat training very seriously. Again, Corvius instructed, watching his daughter attempt the defensive sequence he'd taught her. She went through the movements, stumbled slightly, corrected herself, and finished with a flourish that was pure theatrical flair rather than tactical necessity. How was that? She demanded. Your footwork needs improvement, and that ending spin was completely unnecessary, Corvius said. Then he grinned. But the dramatic flair was excellent. 7 out of 10. Luna beamed, gap-toothed and glowing with pride. Celine watched from the shade, one hand resting on her very pregnant belly. Their second child, Corvius's biological daughter this time, was due within the month. Luna had very strong opinions about what her little sister should be named, most of which involved variants of Princess Sparkle Warrior. They were still negotiating. Mama, Luna called, spotting her. Did you see? Father says I'm getting better. I saw, darling. You're fierce. The fiercest, Corvius confirmed. He swung Luna up onto his shoulders, and she shrieked with delight. Come on, little warrior. Let's go see if Aunt Lyra has finished reviewing the treaty proposals. They walked back toward the palace together, the reformed villain, the rejected queen, and the princess who would unite the North not through conquest, but through proof that different ways could work better. The prophecy had been fulfilled. Just not the way anyone expected. And that, Celine thought, was the best kind of happy ending. The end.
If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it.